Welcome to Coffee with Dr. Stewart. This show will provide our listeners up-to-date medical information from a leading neurologist and neuroimmune specialist. Your host is Courtney Stewart, and your medical expert is Dr. Kendall Stewart. So grab your favorite beverage or cup of coffee, and let's have Coffee with Dr. Stewart.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Dr. Stewart. I'm your host, Courtney Stewart, and today we're going to be bringing you a discussion on fatigue. But first, I got to ask Dr. Stewart, Dad, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Coco. Thanks for asking.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Sure, I'm always ready to talk.
Okay, so we chose this topic because really there's a lot of people, especially that I know of, really in the young adult age especially, where they always say, oh, I'm so tired. And every time I ask them how they are, they say I'm tired.
Right.
And so because so many people say that, we wanted to dive more into, is it just because they're tired or are they actually fatigued?
Right. So, wow, huge topic. In fact, a topic probably is, from a medical perspective, one of the ones that doctors hate the most. I mean, you come in and say, I'm fatigued to a doctor who wants to get you in and out.
Yeah.
And he's going to go,
Yeah.
Maybe you not said it, but that's what he's going to do. And so what happens is we've got to look at it from a lot of different angles because there's all different causes. And then we also got to look at it from age specificity because the people you're talking about who are your friends who are having fatigue, probably a completely different cause.
Yeah, than
somebody who's
older.
middle-aged versus somebody who's older. And basically all different separations and what can drive it and what can cause it. And that's why doctors don't like it because it's not an easy answer.
Yeah.
And it's also, you want to help the patients a lot of times as fast as you can. And a lot of times it's not an easy recovery.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take time because you've got to alter bad habits and create new habits, new lifestyles. You've got to get a lot of lab work, wait for the results. You've got to look at a lot of different things. And so it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And so if you have a doctor who's not really interested in you, you're probably in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem with fatigue is really there's quite a bit of different things to understand it. Nobody really knows what causes the sensation of fatigue. In fact, when you look at it from a biochemical perspective, there's lots of people studying it down at the cellular level and at the neurological level. And there's actually a part of our brain called the insular cortex that actually can assimilate all this data from different parts of our body. And if it sees that we're actually expending too much energy, then it actually will drive what we think of as fatigue at the emotional kind of psyche level.
Okay.
Because really fatigue can be defined as many different things. One is it can be defined as I don't have enough energy for the task I want to do.
Yeah.
Okay. The second is my muscles won't do the task that I want to do even though I'm motivated.
Yeah.
And then third is a sense of just emotional, I don't want to say desperation, but you're viewing everything that you have to do much worse or much harder than what it really is.
Yeah, just like an overall weakness.
Yeah, so, I mean, when you get into the psychology of fatigue, just imagine if you really viewed the world as I can't really perform anything.
Yeah.
I'm just, even though I want to live a full life and all that, I just can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
like you were saying, the energy production is less than the energy needed. And so it's kind of like every day you need your phone on 100% whenever you wake up in the morning, but some people it's only on 20%.
That's right.
Or it's only on 50%. You forgot to plug it
That's
in.
Me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so basically the way I approach it, it's a little bit different. If you're going to read about it, now you have to kind of define fatigue versus chronic fatigue. Remember, unfortunately, the way medicine is going these days, we want to fit everything into a little box. So doctors pay a lot more attention, in my mind, to putting the diagnosis on the patient than actually worrying about the treatment and why the patient's being sent. So the nice thing in my practice is I take cash, which makes it a lot easier for me because I give them a proper diagnosis, but it's not such an important thing for me to get that right diagnosis so that I get paid.
Yeah.
So I tell the patient, you really don't care when you come in here what I diagnose you with. You care if I make you better.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're there at the doctor because you don't want to have that fatigue anymore. Am I right? And so in general, I tend to break it down a little bit different than you're going to read. Now, chronic fatigue has been put in a box with another syndrome called ME, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis. Encephalomyelitis means inflammation of the brain and the nerves.
Okay.
And myalgic means my muscles hurt. Well, I'm going to tell you that to me is just way too narrow for chronic fatigue, because they also say that fatigue that lasts over 3 months is probably chronic fatigue. But I know lots of people with chronic fatigue that don't have muscle pain and the other things. So I don't like that box.
Yeah.
So what I like to do, since I'm not worried about what box you fit in, I like to back up and say, okay, how can I approach this patient to get to my end point where I can tell them what's wrong? And so I like to think of fatigue in 3 separate categories. Okay. So I like to think of it as a lifestyle cause, something you're doing in your lifestyle. And that's appropriate for young people. Yeah. Because there are lots of people that, including me, when I was a teenager in my 20s, I did lots of things that probably weren't great for me to have lots of energy.
Yeah, to recover you. Yeah.
The second is a metabolic issue. That's probably more of the middle-aged women. You know what I mean? Now, and that really kind of excludes people that then have the last one, which is pathologic fatigue, which means they have something pathologic in their medical problem that is creating fatigue that's ongoing. What I mean, they have a disease state, or they have something that's in them that is really taking all their energy. So if I divide it into those 3, then I can typically work through it in more of a compartmentalized process. Yeah. Because, you know, when you go see the doctor and you say fatigue, we're going to have to get blood work. We're going to get genetics for sure. Yeah. We're going to talk about, well, what do you really mean by fatigue? We're going to talk about, how do you sleep? What are you eating? What time of the day do you go to sleep? Sleep hygiene. Where are you sleeping? Do you have the Wi-Fi on in your room? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of different things we've got to work through in each of those areas.
Yeah. And so before we dive into like the causes of some fatigue, why would fatigue become a big problem like in your health?
Well, because it gives you a feeling of hopelessness. You feel like you're not living life in my mind to what it could be. Okay. I mean, I've had what I would consider fatigue at a couple of times in my life. One of them was when I was in residency and I was working 80 hours a week, and I was on call every 3rd night, and I didn't sleep if I slept at all, I didn't sleep very well because I was sleeping in the hospital. And I'm pretty sure that during many of those years, I was probably what you would consider chronic fatigue, but I wasn't sick. Yeah. It was just a lifestyle issue. Okay. The second time I had it is I actually caught an Epstein-Barr activation. And that fatigue was different for me. That fatigue was, I was used to going to the gym, riding my bike. If somebody said, let's go to the lake, whatever, I would be able to, I'd say, yeah, let's go. During that time, all I wanted to do was lay at home. Yeah. And it really is kind of depressing because you're a reasonably healthy person, and you don't know what's wrong. And that's what's so frustrating about it. And I'm going to tell you, at the time, I even went to see a doctor and they didn't do anything for me. Yeah. You know, so it kind of drove our understanding because, you know, in my practice, fatigue is an inherent thing. Because when you come to see me, as the most part, you actually are sick. Yeah. And now you can expect that every patient with cancer undergoing cancer treatment is going to have fatigue too. I mean, there's just no doubt. So it's just a little different animal. You've got to look at the patient, you got to understand what they're saying, and then you basically back up and do your best, but you got to pay attention.
Yeah. And you got to analyze. Yep. Okay, so now we want to go into some different causes of fatigue. So the first one we have down, which is one of the lifestyle causes, which you kind of already mentioned, was poor sleep habits or poor sleep hygiene. So
can I tell you an old wives' tale? Yeah. Okay. Well, let me back up. Let me put the science to it. Did you know they've actually studied circadian rhythms, and they found out every cell in the body, not just our brain, but every cell in the body actually has a clock inside of it based on circadian rhythms. Okay. And those circadian rhythms are actually tied to the light dark cycle of the daytime. Okay. So at the brain level, we have the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a part of the brain that actually recognizes light and essentially starts the cycle of awake or the cycle of asleep. We have completely destroyed that whole system with these wonderful things, computers, TVs,
all the stimulation,
indoor lighting, and all that kind of stuff. So the circadian dysrhythmia, meaning of the modern day lifestyle, not only does it throw off your sleep cycles, but it actually throws off the cycles of all your cells.
Okay.
You probably know, for example, that most people have a cortisol spike during their sleep at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. There's a little bit of bump in cortisol to kind of start what I call pre-waking you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if you throw that whole cycle off, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And it's very erratic. And so sleep hygiene is really difficult. Now, what I was going to tell you, there's an old wives' tale. And I love old wives' tale because I like to try to figure out physiologically what they were really saying. And that old wives' tale says that every hour before midnight, it's worth 2 hours of sleep.
Yeah. You told us that last night.
I know I did. And I think that's totally cool because what they're really talking about is that circadian rhythm-wise, we're actually supposed to go to sleep kind of with the sun down.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
Now, that varies from time of year and probably has to do with the fact that we're supposed to be, the way we typically live our life, we're supposed to be a lot more busy during the summer than we are in the winter with that light and dark cycle. But in general, what they were saying is that you'll get better restful, better circadian rhythm sleep by sticking to that schedule.
Okay. Yeah, because I know you have some patients that you tell them, like especially ones that have sleep issues, you'll tell them to go and watch the sunset.
Correct.
Why?
Well, because what I want to see is that, well, here's the way I got to it. If you ever go out, I was camping one time, and it was kind of in the fall. It got dark. We started a fire, and I was like, man, I'm exhausted, tired. And I looked at my watch, and it's 7:45. So what had happened is I had watched the sun go down. Even though we were looking at a fire, it's not the kind of light that we have in sunlight. And my brain was already tired and ready to go to sleep. And so I'm like, okay, this is really something that is really built into our nervous system's function. And so it basically tried to get me for people to understand that the amount of sleep, the larger person you are, the more sleep you need. Okay. We have to have this talk with athletes all the time because the big guys, the big linemen, they need 2 or 3 more hours than the guy out there playing cornerback or the guard versus the center on the basketball team. You've got to understand that you've got to get enough sleep to actually regenerate. Now, what sleep does for us is we typically have release of growth hormone if we get into deep sleep. We have basically some metabolic changes to our other organs like the thyroid and the adrenal and everything, and we're trying to create repair of the body. Now, the problem really comes for some people when they can't sleep because of genetic reasons.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because initiating shut-off in the brain is really more of what we call a GABAergic effect. GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, is an amino acid that's used as a neurotransmitter, and it basically relaxes the body, slows the brain down so you can actually shut it off. And some people genetically can't make very much of that.
Okay. Would you say people that like have trouble turning off inflammation, would that correlate to sleep in any way?
Inflammation plays a big role in anything in the brain, including sleep architecture.
Okay.
So that would be more, in my mind, of pathologic, meaning we've got a process in our body that's causing chronic inflammation. Like if you talk to all autoimmune disease patients, they don't sleep well.
Yeah.
None of them. And it's not really because they're not trying to or that they're not tired. It's just that the inflammation does not let the brain work through the process that it really needs to work through. So that lifestyle change, sleep architecture and sleep habits are, sleep hygiene is just very important. The problem is very hard to get people to quit doing their lifestyle.
It is.
you can forget it in teenagers.
Yeah,
It's their
that's what I was gonna
friends, it's
say.
all their social media.
Yeah, they'll just sit and scroll for hours and hours.
And everybody wants a little magic pill that I can take when I'm ready to go to bed and I go to sleep. What really happens, though, is in sleep hygiene, the most important thing is that when you actually get sleepy, if you fight through the next 15 minutes, you just bought another hour and a half of being awake. The sleep cycle has this rhythm to it. And if you actually have the ability that when you're sleepy to turn everything off and go lay down and go to sleep, the problem is a lot of people will not be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And they'll get sleepy. And even if they decide that, they're going to go brush their teeth. Women will take their makeup off, get your pajamas on and all that kind of stuff. Right.
I do that.
And then next thing you know, you're not got in bed and you're not sleepy.
Yep.
You pushed through that. So I'm not even going to get into sleep medicine. It's a very complex thing. We might talk about another episode. But in general, sleep is a major problem.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's probably one of the biggest public health issues that we have today.
I agree. Another lifestyle cause of fatigue could also be poor diet.
Huge.
If you eat crappy, you're going to feel crappy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Your mama is very famous for fussing at the boys, right?
Yep.
Yeah. What you put in your mouth fuels your body.
Yeah.
You shouldn't expect anything that's
Yeah.
good if you don't put something good in your mouth.
Yeah.
And so that is a big problem. Here's what's really interesting. We found out that probably the way this happens is not just the ratio of the foods, the fats, the proteins, and the carbohydrates, because a lot of people actually use those carbohydrates to drive insulin to try to go to sleep.
Okay.
That's the late night snack people.
Okay.
And that's the insulin resistance people.
Mm-hmm.
But they also noticed that the gut microbiome and butyric acid in particular and the health of the immune system basically has a lot to do with sleep initiation too. And it really has to do with basically some fairly complex chemistry of steering tryptophan's production of serotonin away into a stimulant called kynurenine. Okay. And that's actually an enzyme we check on our genetics called IDO1, indoleamine dioxygenase. And basically, people who have that mutation tend to really have sleep problems, and they're always wired. Even though it's not glutamate GABA, it's this different one called kynurenine. Well, they turned out that the gut, if it gets the wrong type of bacteria and can't make enough butyric acid, the immune system will do the same thing. So it takes away that serotonin and that calmness. And so the gut microbiome, we're just barely scratching the surface and understanding it, but obviously has a big role.
Yeah.
So you can't eat Whataburger and Domino's
Yeah, the
every
high
night.
inflammatory foods.
And it's not going to go well,
Mm-hmm.
And then I would also throw exercise in there too.
Yes.
Because people who don't choose to exercise, this is also something that's been very confusing for a long time. Why in the world do somebody who would be fatigued would want to put out more energy to try to get more energy? Well, it actually turns out to be at the cellular level.
Okay.
And it's what we call an epigenetic modification. So genetics are what you're born with and how your genes are. Epigenetics is that God, once we figured out all these genes, God came along and said, oh, by the way, I can turn those genes on and off. And we're like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
We thought we were smart. We weren't even close.
Yeah.
And so epigenetics is if I can make a change to that cell and start making it work harder or do things, I will literally change how the cell works and what it produces by an epigenetic change. I'll turn genes off, I'll turn genes on, and I'll modify that to where it actually burns more energy. We can even find out that the mitochondria has a big role and actually adapts to how much energy you burn versus how much energy you store. And so there's all kinds of beautiful complexity in that area. It's really interesting scientifically, but really the overall gist of it is you don't have to go beat yourself up at 2 hours at the gym. What you really need to do, according to most researchers, is 27 to 33 minutes worth of exercise that elevates your heart rate, even as much as up to 65% of max.
Yeah. So working out would so it turns on those epigenetic genes?
It turns on some and turns off some. Remember, our cells, if I'm not using them, they don't want to waste energy. They're going to go into hibernation, basically. So lazy people have low metabolic output.
Okay.
They don't make a lot of energy. They adapt to that.
Okay.
Whereas when you start putting out energy,
Yep.
the cell then adapts and starts making more energy.
Yeah. That's why after, like, for me, after I work out for like 2 weeks, then it's like, okay, I do get
That's
energy
right.
from this.
That's exactly right.
Whereas in the beginning, you feel really tired.
So that's epigenetics.
Okay.
God's saying, okay, if we're in, think of it. Let's say we were back in the old days and there was a famine, or it was the ice age and it was so cold there was nothing moving. My cells literally over time can actually turn down my metabolic need and kind of go into a base hibernation. And then when there's food plenty and I'm active and everything, then what'll happen is the cells will then turn up the metabolic need and it'll make me more effective at hunting and moving and working and doing all those things. So it's really exactly what you would expect. It's just it took us a long time to figure it out.
Yep. Give energy to get energy.
Yep.
Okay, next one I want to move on to is hormone disorders. So in dealing with thyroid, insulin resistance, cortisol, how does that all play into fatigue?
So that's that second group that I was talking about, metabolic disorders.
Okay.
And wow. I wish all of fatigue was a metabolic disorder.
Yeah.
No offense, but think how hard it is to be a primary care provider or a family doctor, and you're not really paid to spend a lot of time. You want a silver bullet. You know what I mean? You want to say, oh, it must be your thyroid. Let's check your thyroid. We'll give you some thyroid and you're great.
Yeah.
It don't work out like that.
Yeah.
I wish it did. Now, it's a very rare case that it does. But the thing is, when you're dealing with metabolism, the mitochondria itself, which is the battery of your cells, actually needs 5 things to make it run.
Okay.
So I like to talk about recipes, okay? And you've heard that from me.
Yes.
So what I tell even my young athletes, I'm like, what happens if your mom makes a cake and forgets the sugar?
Doesn't taste good.
That's what they say, right? Well, that's kind of like us taking one of those things that the mitochondria need away. So the mitochondria needs glucose. It needs thyroid. It needs a steroid of some type. Now, cortisol is your short-acting one, and then progesterone for women, testosterone for men is more of the long-acting one. It needs methylfolate to drive the Krebs cycle, and then it needs certain vitamins and minerals, okay, in order to execute what it needs. And those are the 5 basic criteria. Now, we could get into some arguments with the scientists about it needs more, but those are the basic 5. And they're ones you can check fairly easily. So if we find out one's deficient, the problem is a lot of the delivery of the other ones actually depend on everything working equally. So what most people don't know about steroids is they're actually made on the surface of the mitochondria too. So if it's weak, you can't even make the steroids.
Yeah.
And so that's why fatigue, if it's a metabolic problem and you're making less energy, you all of a sudden start losing your hormones that you would have made because the mitochondria is not working as well.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the energy is made in the mitochondria. The steroids are made on the surface of the mitochondria, but it's still mitochondria. So in general, a lot of doctors will check your standard blood work and they'll say, oh, it's fine. But in essence, if you don't check genetics and other things, you'll miss some of the other ones. But really what you want to have is a perfect balance.
Yeah.
Because the same thing happens if I make a cake and put too much sugar in it. Make sense? And then here's what's really weird. When I start putting something, let's say you are hypothyroid or your thyroid's really low, and I put you on thyroid, what happens to the other ingredients? You start using more. So once you add something in, you got to go back and look at it again in a couple of months to see if you actually started reducing the levels of the other hormones.
Yeah, is it all still balanced?
Okay. Now, ultimately, what will happen, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about cortisol crisis, adrenal crisis, and all that. We will try to drive that energy using a lot of cortisol from our adrenal. But the long and the short of it is that's a short-lived effect, and you can really burn it out pretty quick.
Yeah.
So these metabolic causes, really common in women in their 20s and 30s. Obviously, in women, Hashimoto's plays a big role.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you birth control plays a big role.
Yep.
Because that progesterone, I like to say, I'm a man, and if I didn't have any testosterone, most people would feel really sorry for me. But if you're a woman and you don't have any progesterone, nobody feels sorry for you.
Yeah, because a lot of people just think it's estrogen for women.
But it's not. It's progesterone plays a huge role. So that's why we need to pay attention. And the problem with birth control, we don't want you to have a baby when you're not supposed to. But the problem is most of the ways that we use pills, some of the IUDs, et cetera, basically trick the pituitary into lowering those levels. So you go measure a 20-year-old woman on birth control, and she's got a 50-year-old progesterone. Make sense?
Yeah.
Now, she's accomplishing what she should, but that's why a lot of women gain weight on birth control, because just like women gain weight when they get to menopause.
Yeah, it's because they're progesterone. I know, like, for me, especially around puberty age, everybody always feels so tired. I felt so tired. Would you call that, like, teenage hormones in that age range fatigue? Or what?
Sure.
How does it... Because I know it's always fluctuating. It's always changing.
So here's the biggest problem, and this is actually one of my questions for God. Okay. The mismatch between the growth phase and the hormonal growth phase is off. I can have all these 14-year-old, 15-year-old women who look like full-grown women, but they got baby hormones.
Yeah.
Men especially. You'll have these 14-year-olds who are 6'1", and then you check their testosterone, and it's like a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So there is a mismatch there.
Okay.
I'm sure God has a great reason for it.
So there's basically two different growth phases.
Right. And so and I don't know anybody who would really like to go back to being 13 or 14 again. Do you?
No.
I would never do it. Now 18, maybe. Yeah. But 13 or 14 is not fun. And so the problem is you're anxious, you're stressed, you're growing like crazy, you're awkward. And it's you're actually expending probably at least 3 times the energy of a full-grown person.
Yeah.
And so I think it's accepted that those people, those children, young adults, whatever you want to call them, are fatigued. And it may be that some of that's, a little bit of that's actually necessary. Because what fatigue is fatigue as a general rule for me is the body telling you not to ever exceed its energy requirements to a point where you would actually hurt yourself.
Okay.
To me, that's the mechanism. Fatigue is the mechanism to keep us from overexerting.
Safety mechanism.
It's a safety mechanism. That's right. It's a safety valve.
Okay.
So if I have a muscle that fatigues, if you've ever done supersets.
Yeah.
Okay, supersets. You got this little 10-pound weight and it's easy. And then you get to 30 and all of a sudden you're like, oh.
Yeah.
That's basically my muscle telling me, okay, you're getting ready to exceed the limitations I have. So that would be muscular fatigue. But I think physical fatigue is that too.
Yeah.
Okay. And the energy needs at that age are just monstrous.
Yeah. Yeah.
This show is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not use anything mentioned in this show as your own medical advice. Please discuss all medical issues with your own provider.